Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Green Tea Podcast. Did you guys miss us? All right. Well, today we're going to be talking about intensity in relationships because it is Scorpio season, apparently. So, Emma, could you dive into the Scorpio, whatever that's going on? A lot of Scorpio birthdays right now.
Yeah, definitely. So we are officially in Scorpio season. It runs from October 22nd to November 21st this year, 2024. And some themes that are going to be coming up during Scorpio season are things like intensity, like you mentioned, depth, power and power dynamics, changes and transitions in that as well. Interestingly enough, we just came off like the election here in the US, which is all about a transition of power in the government. We've got resources, manipulation, grudges, betrayal, obsession, things like that. So those are themes that might be coming up, or more shadow themes. But we also have themes like forgiveness or trust, exposing of the truth. We have instinct. Did I say instinct already? And a willingness to evolve, which are maybe more empowered, if you will, expressions of Scorpio season. So yeah, we're going to dive into that and talk about how, that might impact our relationships coming up.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on there, obviously, with Scorpio, but we did want to pick out one specifically for today's episode, which is relationships. I guess to start off, there's a lot of, I don't know how you say, a stigma around Scorpio people. They say that Scorpio people are very intense. So is that true or not? I do have some Scorpio friends, and I feel like that is true to a certain degree. Like I know a friend who's Scorpio, and in relationships, like, she dives deep into it. Her emotions are up and down. Of course, everybody is, but is it Scorpios particularly?
Yeah, it's funny. I would agree with that. In relationships, if you have Scorpionic influence there, you can really, like you said, dive deep into your relationships, like so deep that you almost end up like merging with the other person. Like the relationship is so intense and it's so, enmeshed, if you will, that you can lose yourself like totally in the relationship because you're so like marked by this obsession with your partner, with the connection, or things like that. So yeah, I would say that it does definitely resonate with Scorpio energy in relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. I've also had another friend who complained about Scorpio men where he would like stalk and like do some crazy obsession thing. So, yeah, I'm like, wait, it might be true that Scorpio people are very intense, Scorpio suns, yes. But I know we all have a bit of Scorpios in us.
Yeah, like just to give you an example, right? Like I have my 7th house is in Scorpio, and I also have Pluto, the planet that's naturally ruled by Scorpio, in my 7th house. So there's a lot of Scorpionic influence in my relationships specifically, and I can attest to that where sometimes me, but oftentimes the person that I'm attracting also has been very intense in some ways, and very probing, almost invasive, trying to dig into your secrets and find out all this stuff about you, or, whatever, stuff like that. So we can get into that later. But
yeah. I think you also mentioned that nightlife is very Scorpionic energy. So I'm wondering if it's Scorpio season right now, is nightlife doing well? Are a lot of people going to clubs? Just kidding.
That's funny. That's a good question. I'm not sure if collectively like more people are going to clubs, because realistically, you would probably have to look at like other factors that are happening collectively with the transits. But yeah, I did notice a lot of Scorpionic people in that environment, like this desire to kind of like know what's under the surface and like reveal secrets and know what really happens in these types of clubs. So yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. I'll just say that. I don't know if we'll see an increase in that, but
yeah,
we'll see.
Well, particularly in relationships. So I really want to bring out the story. So on Grazy TV, on my true crime / spirituality channel, I have been interviewing a couple people who actually are going through real life struggles and problems. And one of them that I'm talking to are fathers and mothers who are going through a kidnapping case. And in Korea, we call this 부모 따돌림, or an alienation of the other party as a parent. So in Korea, if you're married to a Korean spouse and one spouse, let's say you have a fight and they take the child and they run away somewhere unknown, and you even go to court, even if you win the custody battle in Korea, there is no legal enforcement that actually comes and takes the child like in America. In Korea, they consider the other party, other parents just as the right parents. And even if, unless there's like, I think like an abuse case, something really extreme, usually the child gets to stay with that parent until unknown amount of time. And even after winning court battle cases and getting visitations, if the other party doesn't want to come for visitations, there was no like legal consequences or like somebody coming and trying to take the child away. So a lot of
Mm,
these parents that I've talked to have not seen their child for as long as like 8 years. One of the guy that I talked to
mm,
yesterday, he hasn't seen his son in 8 years. He just recently got to see his son last year, and his ex-wife, is ignoring all court orders, and still at the end of the day, there is no consequence. So
mm.
a lot of these, mostly actually it's fathers who are suffering more than mothers, but I did talk to one foreigner. She's a mom. She wasn't able to see her child for months, and she just recently did through visitations. A lot of the times they get married to the other spouse and they're very intense. So even if they get a divorce, hey, I want to see my child. Hey, like we went to the court, I have custody, I have visitations, weren't we seeing? And the other party would just give this long rant, reasons why they don't want to come to the visitations or they can't. You
Mm.
did this, I did that. And a lot of them blame narcissism and, either it's mental illness or whatever it might be of
Mm.
why the parents are not cooperating and are being very selfish and using children as pretty much bait or like this trade off. So it made me think, wow, like there's so many people out there who are in intense, crazy relationships that makes you question if I should get married because, the guy that I talked to yesterday, Ed, he says that he was head over heels when he met his wife. They got married after a couple months. Everything is honeymoon and great then. But after a while, he started to notice all these signs. So, when it comes to relationships, how do we deal with intensities and what would we have done if we were in this position? And why do people act so intense, especially in romantic relationships? That's just one example that I want to give.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Because yeah, I don't really know much about like how all that works in Korea, but it's interesting to hear that like this is a struggle that people are facing. I think the first thing that I would say to this, or the main thing that I would say to this is like, I think that this issue transcends astrology. Like, I think that you can be of any sign and have any whatever in your chart and still experience something like that or exhibit that type of behavior. It sounds to me like what you're describing is a lot of, if we are relating it to Scorpio, things like power struggles and manipulation. Scorpio can, like, disempowered scorpionic relationships can be marked by things like control issues, jealousy, possessiveness. Like I said, I was talking about resources and I was talking about manipulation. In this case, like a child could be a resource that is kind of being like manipulated or used as a bargaining chip, kind of like you said, to gain control over a partner. Unfortunately, I'll say unfortunately, just because a child I don't think should ever be put in that position, Um, but this can lead to a back and forth or cyclical cycle of just two people trying to have the upper hand and maintain control over the other partner or the situation or whatever, which, like I said, it leads to turmoil. It can also be things like partners trying to isolate another partner, or manipulate them into thinking a certain way and pulling them away from their family and their friends, using the silent treatment, playing mind games to, again, like maintain that power and that control, feeling like they know what's happening, it's happening on their terms, and the other person is left in the dark. The other person is put in a vulnerable position, but they have the power and they want to protect themselves. And this often will reveal like a relationship that becomes more about winning and having control than it does about
Mm-hmm.
mutual support. And interestingly enough, winning in competition is a facet of Mars, and one of the signs that Mars is the ruler of is actually Scorpio. So
Wow.
yeah, so there's a lot of overlap there, but I would say that's one of the ways that that can be seen very, very obviously in what you just described.
Yeah, it's interesting because Ed yesterday, when he was talking about his case, he said that his ex-wife would always say, I always win. Like everything is under her terms and
Yeah.
everything is about control and winning, like you said. And it's just such an interesting thing with human beings because we always, of course, want to win. But in relationships, I've found that it is so hard to always win. And, just like recently I've had somebody, relationship problem where I felt like I was losing and I didn't know what to do. I felt like this person was cheating and lying and I was trying to gain control somehow to figure out what was going on. But at the end of the day, I've learned that, sometimes winning is just letting go. Like me trying to stay there and make myself crazy is losing, especially in the long term, because you're losing your time and your energy.
I think actually that's one of the things that causes problems in relationships is looking at it like one person wins and one person loses, because it would mean that there is an imbalance or whatever, or a transfer of power to viewing somebody who wins as having power and the other person as not. And I actually think that's one of the things that contributes to actually this cycle continuing, is this feeling of like, I need to win. I agree with what you're saying to an extent, that like sometimes letting go is winning. I wouldn't describe it as winning, but I get what you're saying. Like sometimes that's the healthier choice, like to interrupt the cycle, you know what I mean? To break this and to finally free yourself from those chains, in which case I could see how that could be translated as a win, you know what I mean? So I get where you're going with it. But I think it's interesting, like in astrology, Aries and Libra form the axis of the self versus the other in like relationships. And one of the shadows of Aries is competing and turning everything into this competition that needs to be like a winner and a loser. If you're mirroring that type of concept, Libras would be kind of like opportunism, you know, like not necessarily somebody winning or losing, but kind of like a transactional relationship of like only giving if somebody gives something to you. Um, and I think that there can be a place for that in the world. But I think for healthy relationships, like those mentalities kind of need to cease. You know what I mean? If you go into a relationship thinking like, oh, I always need to have the upper hand over my partner, I always need to be the one winning, then it kind of squashes an ability for real connection, to just connect with another person and just be like, yeah, we're just two people here trying to do our best, and hopefully both of us can have our needs met. The idea with Aries is that it's all about your own needs. And so if you're winning, the chances are you're also looking at this like, oh, my needs are being met and what I want is being met, but oftentimes at the expense of another person. And then with Libra, it could be kind of like, oh, I'm only, like I said, I'm only going to give to this person if I get something in return. Now, I'm not advocating for being in relationships where there's no reciprocity, of course. But the thing is that when you pour into something with love that's healthy, it will want to pour back into you. Like it just does. It's just a natural thing. It's in your friendships, and as well, you'll see it in your family. I think that that's another interesting thing. If you look at relationships from an astrological standpoint, you can see Aries and Libra being there as well, and how this concept of winning or keeping count can sometimes be beneficial, maybe, but for a large portion of relationships overall, I think it can create a barrier actually to
Yeah.
connection.
I do agree with that. It's like trying to keep tally on relationships, like business. It's just not going to work. Because then you can go on and on. Hey, I bought this for you. Or you bought this for me. You're going to be counting every cent, which doesn't really work. But I do think that like this year I've realized that when something isn't, like you said, reciprocating, what was the word?
Reciprocating.
Or reciprocating. I think if something is not reciprocating after a while, like I want to kind of like throw my hands up and say, okay, I think that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've learned that when I keep like giving this patience, it kind of allows this person to do whatever they want without any consequence and without any boundaries, which is me. It's a me problem, Grace problem, where I'd never really had boundaries with people that I really cared about and loved. And I thought about unconditional love, something like how your parents does for you, or maybe an old friend, or maybe how your husband or wife is supposed to give you this unconditional love. I kind of don't agree with that anymore, because I have my time and my energy and my life. And as I kept waiting and giving my patience, this person just decided to do whatever the heck they want. And it was just really minusing on my confidence and in my life. And it seems like my whole world was about this person and not me. So
Yeah.
I do agree now that in my relationships, that if it's not working out, I have to realize it. I have to put the flag up and say, Grace, no more. That's the lesson that I'm learning this year with intensities in relationships.
No, I mean, and I think that's a beautiful like testimony, because it's true that like with Libra, you know, like, yeah, there is you know, this hope that like if you're pouring into something and pouring into a relationship, it'll give back to you. But you're right. There are times when we get into relationships where that's not happening. You know what I mean? Even if we're not keeping count, we'll start to notice like, oh wow, like I'm really kind of giving to this, or you're giving to this person, and I'm not really getting my needs met, or it's not being reciprocated. And then in that case, yes, like sometimes the right choice absolutely is to walk away, to put up that boundary and say, hold on, now there's an imbalance, because Libra is also about balance. There's an imbalance here. Now only one person is getting their needs met, and it's coming at the expense of me. So sometimes that's, yeah, absolutely what needs to be done. I think that's a really awesome lesson for people to kind of like take from that as well, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in relationships, the reason why, especially romantic relationships, actually in any relationship, especially with your parents and your kids, but in relationships when you have this tight intimacy, one of the doctors, psychologists, explained that the reason why we do that is because like once you bond with somebody, the brain naturally actually thinks of that person as part of you.
Mhm. Yeah.
Now, it is easy to control yourself, but you can't really control the other person. But your brain is like, hey, Emma is my friend, or he's my husband. Of course, he has to do what I say.
Mhm.
Like, he's not moving the way that I want him to. And when you can't control something, all of a sudden, like, you have this immense anger. That's why our parents, when the kids don't listen, they get angry with us, and vice versa. And especially in romantic relationships. So I think when you can't control something, humans can get this intensity, but you always have to realize, hey, at the end of the day, like the only body that you will ever have in your life is you. Like this is my machine. I can't control anybody else. The only thing you can
Mhm.
control is you. So like kind of like the spiritual guru Bashar said, treat everybody almost like a stranger,
Mm.
which is, you know, you have to understand that like at the end of the day, that person is their own being and I am my own being.
It's true that that's how we're wired as people. Like it helps us increase our chances of survival when like we feel like we have control over a situation. And so yes, we as humans will do whatever we can, sometimes on an unconscious level, to control a situation. You made a really good point, which is kind of the embodiment, the empowered expression of Scorpio is actually surrender. It's to let go of control. The shadow, one of the shadows, if you will, of Scorpio is considered, I don't want to say shadows because I think like even shadows can have their time. One of the shadows of Scorpio is, yeah, it's trying to manipulate, to control, to force control instead of surrendering and trusting to things that I mentioned earlier, that maybe, you know, this is not something that's meant to be controlled. And if it's not finding you and attracted to you out of its own will and willingness and desire to be there, then it's not something that you should try to force. Just let it be. And, you know, whatever happens will happen. And sometimes trusting that and letting go of that control is very difficult for people, and so that's why they resort to um, control. It shatters their world as they know it. It shatters their sense of safety, even their identity. For some people, to have to let go of something. This is a random example that's coming to me just now, but it's like trying to keep animals in captivity that don't belong in captivity. And I'm not talking about like rehabilitation centers where like the animal will die if it's freed. I'm talking about like for people's entertainment, keeping animals in captivity. Like eventually things start to happen. Like the animal dies, they get unhealthy, or they start behaving, they're
Yeah.
pushing back against people that keep them held. You know what I mean? Because that's the nature, that's the other side of nature, is a desire to be free, a desire to just do what it is that you want to do, to exist as you are. And when someone tries to come in and impede that, you will react like you're trying to break out of a cage naturally.
Yeah.
You know, if that's where you feel like you're at, where like the only way you'll have success with something is by manipulating and controlling it, you actually don't have any control over it, which is the irony of it, you know.
It's hard to find a balance because like I know that at times like of course we bonded with this friend or romantic partner or your kids, you bonded with somebody and it's like telling somebody, hey, I don't want to be here anymore. It's so hard to hear it. And somebody said that like, good luck trying to get over that in a month because it's hard. That's how much like memories and bond that you have with another person. But at the end of the, but also it's like, I remember I met this guy a long time ago, like just a friend. And he told me that ever since he was young, he would move around like every year. His parents just, for work or whatever, he moved around. And even now as an adult, he just cannot stay in one place.
Mhm.
He always has to move around, literally moving places, moving jobs.
Mhm.
And then I look at those people and I'm like, wow, like I also wouldn't want that, you know, when somebody cannot keep a promise or commitment. Of course, I don't believe that like relationships has to be like a contract thing at all, but where do we draw the line with like us wanting freedom at the same time keeping that bond and promise with somebody
Right.
is yeah, something that I've been thinking about.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I can maybe speak to that because I have a similar background to that person that you're
Mm,
talking about. Now, one thing I want to point out really fast is that what looks like balance to you might not be what looks like balance to somebody else. Do you know what I'm saying?
mm-hmm.
So that's where we also have another thing. It's not just like A and B being balanced. It's the fact that A has its own A and B has its own A and B. You know what I mean? There's a meter within me that feels like balance. There's a meter within you that feels like balance. And then there's the balance of me and you coming together. Do you see what I'm saying? So
Mm.
now we're playing with way more factors than just, oh, it's freedom or it's commitment. So with that in mind, growing up as a kid, I moved a lot. I love to travel. I love to see the world. I love to live in different places and expose myself to different culture because it's a learning experience for me. But I do agree with you that it doesn't mean that just because I'm freedom loving or I've experienced that in my life, it means that there should be no such thing as commitment. Um, in fact, when I moved to California, I remember asking myself, like, do I want to move because I truly feel like a call to go there? Like something is there for me and I feel like it's the right choice for me to make and that I could really grow and expand there? Or am I moving because I'm just used to moving? And I'm moving because, I feel tied down or like restricted here where I am in New York, for example, which could be seen as more of that like commitment side, like the commitment to staying there even through limitations and restrictions and delays and things like that. And I think personally for me, it was a little bit of both. Like I grew in certain ways that I don't know, maybe I could have grown here, but either way, there was positive benefit to that. At the same time, I was able to realize there are certain things that didn't change at all because I moved here. And that's a side of me that realizes that in that moment, two truths exist at the same time. One of them is that there is a desire that I have to grow and explore and learn. But I also realized at the same time that there are certain things that I was dealing with, that I was going through, that were not going to be alleviated by this jumping around and seeking freedom.
Yeah, I think everybody definitely, like you said, has their own safe place and what's right for them.
Yeah.
We've been talking about this a lot, where at the end of the day, life is about just belief. Like whatever you believe is right, and
Yeah.
what everybody believes in their own head, even with the closest people in your life, are all different. My
Yeah.
parents believe that being Christian is right. I don't think like that, and the other person might think differently. So who is right or wrong? Like nobody's really right or wrong. But at the end of the day, I guess, humans, we have to have some kind of a balance and a structure. I do agree with that.
Something that's really interesting, right? So we've talked a little bit about like Aries, like Aries and Libra in relationships. And then after Libra is like Scorpio. We talked a little bit about Scorpio. And then after Scorpio is actually Sagittarius. And Sagittarius rules actually things like travel, freedom, like authenticity, things like that. So we just talked about moving, but also it rules our belief systems. It's also like religion, and it's really like the world view. And Sagittarius, though, is understanding of the fact, or it rules this theme of like subjective experience. It's the opposite of Gemini, which is all about facts, data, figures, science. It's like what's provable and repeatable, and it's objective in some sense. But Sagittarius is about objective things. It's your belief systems. It's the understanding that there is no right or wrong. It's just that everybody has a different worldview. And the empowered expression of Sagittarius is being able to amass, if you will, or study or just even experience different worldviews and not need for one of them to be right. You know what I mean? Wanting one worldview to be right is dogma. It's saying Christianity is the only way to live. It's saying, this way is the only way to live. Or I was just using Christianity as an example because you mentioned it. When in reality, like that might be like you said, the way that you want to live, but other people in the world don't live that way. So now it comes off righteous, right? The concept of righteousness is also a shadow, if you will, of Sagittarius. It's a belief that your way of believing is what's right for other people, not just for yourself. But yeah, Sagittarius is a higher embodiment, understands that its perspective is solely its own perspective. Its belief system and its worldview is its own worldview. It's not any more right or wrong than another person's worldview. It's just what it believes. And in the high expression, it can view all of these worldviews as just different pieces of a puzzle. But I do think that like sometimes, especially this day and age, like finding harmony amongst that is difficult because not everybody goes in with this understanding of like, oh, it's just a different worldview. It's not right or wrong. They still exist in a world where their worldview has to be right and they have to push it on other people. So that alone causes conflict, and it causes disharmony in the world.
Yeah, in a way, like I've been thinking about harmony. Is it even possible to have harmony in life? Because if you think about it, like for example, America, you have a lot of freedom.
Mm.
But it also leads to a lot of problems. We have a lot of problems here. And I know a lot of people say, oh, I don't want a capitalistic because it's not fair. Well, if you want to make everybody fair, look at North Korea. Or Russia, or like a dictatorship country. It's not really paradise over there either. You know, you try to make everybody think the same, you're always going to have people who rebel or think
Mm.
differently. It's just
Yeah.
almost human nature, maybe, that you can't have the total harmony of what we think in our brain. Maybe there is, you know, up and down, black and white in literally every concept, whether you want to have a dictatorship or freedom, a capitalistic country, you're always almost going to have winners and losers. It's just really weird. Maybe there is no answer. There is no formula to any of this.
I can relate sort of to what you're saying about like this image of harmony and everybody getting along. It just seems very idealistic, I think is all, in
Mm-hmm.
my opinion, because we can all want it, but like the reality of what would need to happen for us to actually exist in that, it's going to take a long, long, long time of like introspection and human reflection and inner work to get there. So I get what you're saying, where in some form it sometimes feels or seems like impossible that it would actually work for people to actually exist in that type of harmony. I do think it's possible, but I think that, yeah, I mean, right now at least, like it seems not as likely to hit that point. But still, I think it's worth something striving toward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, because if you look at all, even the ancient histories, you know, you hear about Atlantis, whether you believe it or not, you know, it was said to be one of the most harmonious time, but it still fell for whatever reasons. It didn't last. If it did, why aren't we living in Atlantis kind of world right now? How about like, the ancient, like the Greek times where you hear all about these gods and how there was so much harmony back then. Or, you know, when Caesar was killed and backstabbed, when a lot of people loved his ideas and he saved his country. But why didn't that work? Why was there somebody who backstabbed him? So I believe that there is really no one harmony, maybe. Like there's always going to be somebody who wants to take you down, even if you win that and try to, you know, keep that going. So maybe the only true positive harmony we have is in the spirit world. If we
Mm.
die actually, and there's like no negative dense energy, and maybe we are here to learn that in the
Hmm.
physical body.
I get what you're saying about like maybe it's just this kind of more spiritual thing where we can have that harmony, we can have that love and this whatever da da da. But when we're here on Earth, it's a different experience that we're having. It's a different thing to learn, and I don't know. I have my own thoughts about just all of that and what would it take to bring that type of like ethereal spiritual energy down to Earth. And that's what I kind of meant earlier is like it's not, I think, impossible, but it's just the way that we're at right now. It doesn't seem likely, like looking down into the line of it, probably because in this lifetime, like it probably won't happen, where every single human being is able to look beyond their desire for survival and see other people in a light of love. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and who knows, like you said, maybe it isn't actually possible just because we are humans and we live in this body that is a human body, with human drives. But I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think there's a lot of stuff that's happening a lot of times beyond what we can see in regard to our own development.
Life is just such a paradox. I remember
Yeah.
one of my spiritual teachers, she was saying that, you know, sometimes in life you have to go with the flow. You have to just let things come and go. But then she also said that, for example, she had a very toxic mother. Well, are you going to just accept her and love her unconditionally? Yes, you can. But at the end of the day, physically, if it really helps you to cut her off and set
Hmm.
boundaries, you have to.
Yep.
It doesn't mean that you have to like take in the knife and the stab all the time. So it's also like finding that balance in life that could really trigger our belief of what is right or wrong. So everything in life is case by case, but
Yes.
yeah, finding that balance is all our homework.
Yeah, exactly. And something that like I've heard this so many times. Maybe you've seen it on the internet, but a lot of people will talk about how just to not get it twisted that like unconditional love does not equal unconditional tolerance. You can
Mm,
still love somebody and like feel this like love for them, this care for them, but like you said, you don't unconditionally tolerate the way that they treat you, for example. And so that might mean you have to set boundaries. It might mean cutting somebody off. It might mean like loving someone from a distance and having a special place in your heart for, say, like your mother, who like has her own demons and has her own da 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 whatever that she's working through, that made it maybe in some form like she couldn't be the person that you maybe needed her to be or wanted her to be at the time, and so now, especially if there is no improvement there and there's no willingness to change, for example, I could see how that could lead somebody to just be like, well, I can still love you and I can still accept that fact, but I can't have you in my life like this close, and so boundary is necessary.
Yeah. And one of my
Yeah.
favorite quotes that I saw this week or this month was, if you're not changing, you're choosing. So rather you're in whatever toxic relationship or relationship with your parents, whatever it might be, if you're constantly in that cycle, that means you're choosing it.
Mhm.
So I totally agree. I totally agree that like if I'm not changing myself or this cycle and breaking the cycle, I am low key subconsciously choosing this as
Right.
well. So yeah, change can be difficult, but it's so refreshing when you come out of it. And I'm like, whoa, like I can change. Like, whoa, my belief, nothing really physically changed, was just my belief.
It's true. It's true. I mean, I think to some degree, to add on to what you're saying, I think that like one thing that I'd heard once was sometimes we look at change through a lens of like hesitancy, and it becomes this narrative of, oh gosh, I have to do this. And then it's like, the dread and the fear and the panic and I have to do this thing. That's going to be hard. But sometimes if we can look at it like, oh, I get to do this thing, right? Like I get to make this change. I get to be somebody different after this. I think that that can be a helpful way to look at things also. It's empowering to look at it like that. Like, especially if the change is something that's a little scary and you're kind of like not really welcoming it, but it's going to happen anyway. Like reframing that is not necessarily this huge, heavy burden that you have to overcome, but this opportunity that you get to have to be somebody different, I think is a really interesting and helpful helpful change, like to make in your own mind and mentality of how you view change.
Yeah. Well, that was our episode on intensities and the Scorpio season. Let me know what you guys have thought about today's episode. Leave a comment down below if your birthday is also in the Scorpio month. And see you guys in our next episode.
Heavy, teasing all day, and when the sun sets, you asking me to